How are you now? I'm James Whelan, a casual talking head for small caps. And today we are joined by Dr. Andrew Tong, CEO of Cobalt Blue Holdings, ASX code COB, Charlie Oscar Bravo. Again, the only thing I learned in flight school was the phonetic alphabet. We'll cover the latest on the Kwinana Cobalt Refinery, the pivot towards black mass recycling, which is actually pretty hot at the moment, at Broken Hill, the cobalt market outlook heading into 2026. My goodness, I blinked and missed it all of a sudden. It's the end of the year. And we will touch on the recent capital raise. Andrew, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, great to be here, James, and great to chat with your listeners as well.
Okay. Well, look, for viewers, it is a hot section, the black mass and also anything in the cobalt space. But for anyone who is unfamiliar with Cobalt Blue, why don't you give us a quick snapshot of what the company is focused on right now?
Sure. Cobalt Blue's been around since 2017. Our aim is to be the leading cobalt processing company in Australia, and we've got opportunities from our own mine in Broken Hill. But in the most recent years, we've really been focused on the processing side of cobalt, and we're trying to build our cobalt refinery in Kwinana, just as part of the Perth Industrial Precinct. And in Broken Hill, we've got a technology centre where we're looking at black mass from battery recycling.
Okay, well, that's a pretty good overview. But there are some divisions. So that Broken Hill Technology Centre, BHTC, is the acronym that will be used, or the initialism that will be used for that one. And we've got the Kwinana Cobalt Refinery, KCR, which is an initialism we'll be using for that. Just so that if anyone just picks up along the way, that's how we're going to be chatting about these sorts of bits and pieces on the way through. Now, let's start at Kwinana. I have been there. It's a wonderful paradise of a place over there, just in south of Perth. Let's start over there. Where does the project stand today in terms of permits, feedstock agreements, and customer qualification?
We're really well placed with our project, but James, like you said, Kwinana is a great place. Within Australia, it's probably one of the only major industrial precincts that we have. So everything's there. It's on a port facility, got rail, intermodal rail and truck and shipping facilities. It's well set up with power and everything's there. In terms of our project, we have a binding feedstock agreement with Glencore for cobalt hydroxide out of the DRC. So that will come over from Africa to Perth, to Port Free, come down to our facility. We're about 10 k's from the port, come down on a truck in a container. We'd process it, make cobalt sulfate and cobalt metal. That would go out through the port. So we've got binding agreements in place for feed. We've got a land piece that we've already located with Iwatani, Japanese trading house. They've got a piece of land there that they're already working on. So just planning to add another shed there and build that out. We've got all the permits in place from WA government. So really we're at that final stage of project development. We need to get our offtake agreements in place, then we can finance this. So that's our big story for 2026.
Okay, and that is going to be a 2026 story too, Andrew?
Yes, look, if everything goes well for us, then we'd love to be financing that project next year and commencing construction. It's only going to take about a year to construct. And if we're able to do that, then by the latter half of 2027, we'll be able to bring on Australia's first cobalt sulfate refinery.
That is some pretty big news, actually. Some good news for Australia there as well, and that part of the world, which is lovely. I was being quite serious, obviously. I used to work over there, and so Kwinana, Rockingham, that was sort of the part of the places we used to get to.
Well, we just creep in because we're just on East Rockingham. So we're one street away from the boundary between East Rockingham and Kwinana.
Yeah, okay, let's stay back on track. You recently refreshed the KCR, base case economics. Now, what changed with that and what sort of an uplift are we seeing there?
So long-term followers of Cobalt Blue will know that we put out economics for our refinery over a year ago. But 2025 has been a massive year. Cobalt's been the hottest commodity this year, and I only get the privilege of saying that every now and again. But cobalt's gone from $10 to $25 this year. And with that, all the different payables for the chemical products have all shifted around a bit. So on one side, we've seen a big rally in price. The second is a diversification from cobalt sulfate for batteries to also cobalt metal for alloys and defense applications. So we've seen a growing market for that metal side. So we've gone and redone our economics, put in the two products, sulfate for batteries, metal for alloys and defense, put in today's metal pricing and payabilities on the chemicals, and just fed that into the model. What's happened is that our MPV's now gone from 90 to 150 million Aussie. The rate of return's gone up to over 32% now. And effectively what that means at the bottom line is that free cash year on year is expected to be about 30 to 40 million Aussie dollars a year.
Okay, and what does that mean for capital requirements?
Well, if we're able to build the project for $60 million and we're able to get into operation, then we've got a very strong free cash flow basis to grow our business. And our big meta strategy is to build our refinery first, get all of the downstream offtake markets better down, and then come back and develop our mining operations. People in this space, critical mineral space, we have really great geological projects in Australia, but the challenge is who's going to buy the stuff and how do you get those markets to start buying the goodies that we want to make? So our strategy is to build the refinery and then come back to the market for a $600, $700, $800 million mine down the line and become vertically integrated.
Okay, build it and they'll come. Nice work. So you've shifted from producing only cobalt sulfate to including alloy grade metal. What's driving that decision?
Really, as I said, it's really the defense and alloy industry coming back online. They've had a few flat years in that space, but with a lot of the effort coming out of the US to raise GDP expenditure across NATO countries in Europe and the Indo-Pacific region, there's a growing demand for cobalt in the defense industries. And then that's feeding through to a much greater demand for cobalt alloy. Alloys used in fighter jet engines, high performance moving parts that need high temperature resistance. And so as those industries get built out, they need more alloy grade cobalt.
That's the easiest answer I could possibly imagine. The defence has, just across the board, the changes that defence has made for some of these metals is extraordinary. Speaking of which, the cobalt prices have moved, as you mentioned, a fair amount this year. Let's get the crystal ball out and have a look into 2026. What do you see as similar sort of price increases for that one, or potentially maybe the market solving its own problem?
Well, we need to understand where the market is now through the context or the prism of what's happened the last few years. So cobalt price crashed because there was oversupply. Demand has always been strong. Demand keeps growing year on year, but there was just too much supply of cobalt coming out of Africa being driven by the Chinese mines there. They overproduced and flooded the market. This year, the DRC government decided that they'd had enough. So they put a ban in place in February. That ban had immediate impact in terms of constraining supply. Then in October this year, they've come out with a quota system going forward. So they're going to regulate the supply of cobalt into the market. DRC is 70-75% of global supply. So they're able to regulate the supply side and better match it to demand. We understand from direct discussions with the government there that they're targeting pretty much a 20 to 30 US dollar a pound cobalt price. Today we sit at 25, right in the middle of that band. So if it goes above 30, you probably start to see some demand destruction, and below $20, you just don't have the revenue coming through the system. So we think that's probably the target that they're going to hold, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and to quote, was it head of commodities at Westpac, an old friend of mine, Rob Rennie, had a great expression about commodities. Commodities prices are their own solution, as you see, sort of in and out. Sometimes it's not so good for a producer at the other side, but you do see these things, ebbs and flows. So we'll see more of that in 2026, I'm sure. Broken Hill, quick pivot. Now you've announced a pivot at Broken Hill towards battery black mass recycling. What's the plan, and why make this move now?
Okay, well, I'll start with the why and then I'll tell you what the plan is. The why is because we want to build our refinery in Kwinana, KCR, and we'd love to have Australian feedstock going into that project. But unfortunately, the nickel industry is largely shuttered at the moment because low nickel prices. So there's just no cobalt byproducts in Australia available. We've done a bit of a market search and we've identified that there is cobalt from recycled batteries. Other people will collect all the batteries. You can go down to Bunnings or Coles or Woolies and chuck them in and they're collected. Other people will strip them and break them down. But all of that metal containing the black material that comes out of that is exported overseas. So we don't think that's a great outcome for Australia. So we want to step up and start taking that material and process it in Australia and ultimately feed that to KCR. But Cobalt Blue has this opportunity to do that next year, 2026, immediately in Broken Hill in our technology centre. We built that 5 years ago. We've done a lot of R&D out there, and we can just, with a few tweaks in terms of capital and some additional equipment, we can start processing some of that recycled material from the batteries, and then we can start building out that industry within Australia.
Okay, and you've mentioned why black mass is such an attractive feedstock option. Do you want to draw on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so obviously we come at it from the lens of the cobalt, but there are other materials in there, nickel, manganese, lithium, graphite, and so on. And when we look across the whole Australian policy landscape, Australia really wants to move up the chain in these value-added materials, but we need to look at them as a group of metals, not just one by one. So battery black mass offers us the opportunity to be diversified. We wouldn't make finished cobalt. So we'd make finished cobalt, But for the lithium, we'd sell that to the lithium guys. For the nickel, we'd be an enabler for their industry, for graphite and so on. So we think there's a great opportunity there for our stakeholders to be diversified beyond cobalt into these other commodities.
Outstanding. I do think that of all the things that we're going to see over the next, probably our lifetimes, Andrew, is going to be that recycling and the renewal of things that were used in industries, especially in the renewable space, and squeezing out as much as we can for second and third and fourth and fifth lives for those things. So good to see that you're part of that train.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of batteries, a big myth that people always say is that cobalt's going to disappear from the batteries and we're going to go to other types of batteries. Now, that's partly true. There will always be different batteries. But one of the advantages of cobalt is that it's used to limit the fires in batteries. And so, some listeners would realize there's been over 100 fires, house fires this year, from low quality, low or nil cobalt batteries in scooters and e-bikes. If we're able to improve the recycling, then it actually tilts the lens back towards using cobalt in those batteries, because the batteries have a complete life cycle analysis.
Yeah.
Whereas if you use those cheap batteries that don't have cobalt, you're more likely to have fires. The regulators are getting very nervous about how to regulate that market. So there's a lot of positives to come out of this.
That is a definite spark to the upside should the regulators come in, and they probably should. I don't want to take too much of a view on what regulators should and shouldn't do. Depends on which regulator I'm talking about, actually, as you know.
Right.
Okay, so how do the Broken Hill Cobalt project and Halls Creek fit into the strategy while you build out the refining capacity?
Sure. So look, Broken Hill Cobalt project has major project status from the federal government. It is a key piece of the Australian landscape as our nation deals with other countries in terms of long-term supply of critical minerals. So we're recognised, our project is recognised as potentially being a large cobalt supplier. We have over 80,000 tonne of cobalt in resource there. We've done a number of studies. Conceptually, that could make nearly 20 million EVs, the amount of cobalt in an EV battery and so on and so on. So it's a very large project. But you need all the macro aspects to bring that forward. We will do that one day. That's our plan. But next year in 2026, our stakeholders can look forward to us submitting our permit applications for that project. If I just move to Halls Creek, we quite like Halls Creek. It's a diversification. It's a silver, copper, zinc project up there. We think that our technology that we've developed for cobalt has some crossover, and it was an asset that we bought opportunistically, but it's a bit of an interesting play for us because silver and copper at the moment are really on a bit of a tear.
Yeah, I think it could be first and second. Well, for silver and cobalt, we'll be first and second on the rankings for this year. Coming into the photo finish is to see how we go. So it's good that you got both of the horses in that race.
Yes, that's right. We're really excited about it. But like all these sorts of projects, to us, it's an opportunistic. Halls Creek is an opportunistic purchase, and we're under no pressure to bring it online. We'll just take our time and assess the opportunities as they come.
Excellent. Now that's very good. Very prudence, I believe, is the term that we're looking for on that one. So now I love talking to companies. I love talking to companies that are post capital raise even more. Congratulations. What was the purpose of this raise? How does it connect your priorities at KCR and BHT?
Well, for KCR, we're now in those final stages of getting to FID, so final investment decision. But it's at that point in the cycle where it's very hard for us to predict how long that will take. We're dealing with counterparties, we're dealing with legal documentation, those sorts of things. So part of the capital raise is so that we have sufficient cash on hand to last us all the way through next year, subject to needing to move ahead on projects or M&A type sorts of things. But the capital raise really puts us in a great cash position to be able to execute as the documents come together. In terms of BHTC, we want to put some of those funds into bringing that online and start processing black mass next year. I'm not at all promising that we'll have profit lines or anything, but we want to start that operation just at a small scale and really start teasing out the opportunities around that.
Not bad. Okay. Well, and finally, and we are coming to the end of our time here, Andrew, what should investors be looking for in the next coming months?
Look, I think the biggest news for us will be around offtakes for the Kwinana refinery. We do have some LOIs in place, but they're commercial in confidence. But we've been working very hard to convert those to binding agreements, and that's our pre-step to doing the financing decision. And it's a pre-step to be able to bring in the debt and equity interest that's out there. There are a lot of people looking at the project, but they really need to see the offtakes in place. So that's really what I'd like us to be working on, and I'd love to be able to deliver for our shareholders.
Okay. Well, Dr. Andrew Tong, from Cobalt Blue, thank you so much for the update. We will keep an eye on those milestones, and for more information, head to Cobalt Blue's website and check out their latest ASX announcements. Andrew, have yourself a great day.
Great. Thanks very much, James.
Not a problem at all. Thank you all for joining us. I'm James Whelan, occasional talking head for small caps. Stay safe. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.